Years ago, there was a man who came to Ordinary Life at the very beginning, and he said, if you institute having cookies, which he calls sacred cookies, in this class, it will eventually cause trouble. So the announcement was made today that we still have sacred cookies. You need to get them before you come. Good morning. Okay. Everybody ready for the storm? Yeah, sure. Mm.
You worried about flooding, Bill?
I'm worried about losing power and having to walk all that distance. Actually, I'm worried that I'm going to feel really guilty making Sherry do that. She did it. So the last I heard last night was that the storm is going to hit further west, but then this morning I heard that it's coming on the Matagorda Bay, and it. Sir?
Just this morning they put Harris County under the storm alert.
Okay. Well, everybody stay safe, stay in, and it'll all be okay, no matter how it turns out. So would you check and make sure that your phone is in the stun position? Thank you to Lauren Cross. I'm going to keep thanking her every Sunday because I told her she's going to A&M at next fall, and I have a granddaughter who goes to A&M, and I told her it's not too far to commute. But if it weren't for her being here and John Watson and Tim, of course, to get all this set up, those of you who are watching online would not be able to enjoy this, and I'm glad you are. So no matter whether you're online or here in person, no matter who you are or where you are in your spiritual journey, you are celebrated here. And as we do, let's begin in silence. Let's take a deep breath or two and collect your thoughts and be here. And may grace be in our heads and in our thinking. May grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. May grace be in our ears and in our hearing. May grace be in my mouth and in my speaking. May grace be in our hearts and in our understanding. And may grace be in our ends and at our departing. So last week, I concluded this time by saying that at the moment, and things can change, for me, being involved in the sacred stream involved three non-negotiables. One of those is hope, a realistic acceptance of what is, and finding the religion in the religion that got us here. And though all three of these things are connected, at least in my mind, what I want to focus on today is what I'm calling finding the religion within religion. Now that's a phrase that I first heard from Dietrich Bonhoeffer when I was in the cemetery. It's amazing how frequently I do mispronounce that word, but I'm doing it really deliberately now. Bonhoeffer was executed in his attempt to overthrow the Nazi regime. And I'm going to return to Bonhoeffer today later in my teaching, but I just want to introduce him at the beginning to say that he gets the credit for this. Bonhoeffer actually called what his approach was religionless Christianity, because I'm calling it religion within religion, because What I am hungry for in my own life and want to articulate in my teaching is a religion, not spirituality. We've distinguished between the two, that goes beyond religion. I would, for example, at the moment, have very little interest in attending an interfaith dialogue. I would be very interested if somebody held an inter-hope dialogue. Interfaith dialogues tend to fall apart the moment we take positions to say how our religion is not like somebody else's and we can't commingle in anything. So religions, as essential as they are, and they are essential, are so divisive. A good evidence of that is what is happening exactly right now in our culture. There was a family in Northern Ireland. They had 9 children, good Catholic family. The youngest of their children, a girl, when she graduated from high school, decided to come to the United States to see if she could make her way here. And after being here for a while, her parents received a cashier's check for $1,000 from her as a gift. They were very grateful. A few months passed, and a new Mercedes pulled up in front of their home. The car dealer got out and handed the father the keys to the new Mercedes, said, "This is a gift from your daughter." A number of more months passed, and a realtor shows up at the house and drives them to their new home, which is also a gift from the daughter. Months pass, Christmas comes, the daughter shows up in their hometown in Northern Ireland. A lot of gifts for Christmas for the family. And as they're visiting her father, whom she in good Irish fashion called Da, said, we're very grateful and appreciative for the gifts, but we don't know exactly what it is that you do. And she said, "Well, Da, I'm an escort." And he said, "An escort, what is that?" She thought of a way to try to explain it to him that he would understand, and so she couldn't think of anything, so finally she just said, "Da, I'm a prostitute." He broke down in sobs, crying, couldn't believe that he had raised a daughter to embrace such a life. She went over to the couch where he was sitting and put her arms around him and said, "Oh, it's not that bad. Actually, things have changed quite a bit. Being a sex worker is not disreputable." And he said, "Sex worker?" "Yeah, I'm a sex worker. I'm a prostitute." He said, "Oh, thank God. I thought you said Protestant." So it is astounding to me that those who are still at mythic levels of development, you remember the Jimmerian levels of development that we talked about, are can be so certain about things at the religious and spiritual level. They don't know themselves, but they seem to be so certain about God and about religion and about what ought to be. Now, the mystics in all religions are mystics because they know that they don't know. However, there's that very important theological word again. However, in our culture, the religion that is in the DNA of every person in this room is some form of what is called Christianity. When I introduced this theme of living in the sacred stream at the beginning of the year, and by the way, the more I've lived with this theme, the richer it has gotten for me because I see it in such a multifaceted way. It's so much richer than when I first thought about it. But at the beginning, you remember that we talked about the sacred stream as consisting of four things: an evolving, growing relationship with sacred mystery, an evolving, growing relationship with the self, of an evolving, growing relationship and understanding of Jesus and his teachings, and an evolving awareness of our ongoing involvement in evolutionary movement. Those four things, remember? Those are the four things. And actually, when I first thought of this theme, I imagined that we would be spending most of our time talking about Jesus and his teachings. Because the works that inspired this theme were Stephen Mitchell's The Gospel of Jesus, Tolstoy's The Gospel in Brief, which if you've looked at it is not brief, John Sanford's The Kingdom Within, Robert Funk's Gospel, and though it is not about Jesus, Kathleen Singh's brilliant book, Unbinding, because all of these books use the metaphor of the stream or a spring about which to talk about their work. And the effort to get back to the source of purity in the stream, to be aware of it, and all of that. And all of them refer to the fact that all religions, over a period of time, become different things than their founders intended them to be. So part of being involved in the sacred stream is an attempt to go back and to see if we can find the purity in the origin of the stream. And then to transcend the religion that grew out of that origin, to see if we can recapture some of that stuff without it being affected by cultural contaminants. Make sense? That's easier said than done. I mentioned in here a couple of weeks ago that I'm having a love affair, and yes, Sherry knows about it, with the philosopher John Caputo. And I just love this guy's work. I love his way of thinking. He's just brilliant. So let me read to you a passage. He says, "I am in pursuit of something that religion contains without being able to contain." That's just beautiful. A religionless religion far too important to leave to men of religion who earn a profitable living off our anxiety. I'm interested not in coming up with another proof for the immortality of the soul or the existence of a super being in the sky, but in matters of the heart, in saving the word religion from religion. So it's my lifelong involvement with religion that got me here, with an enormous feeling of gratitude and appreciation. It's also that very religion that taught me that there's more to the religion than is being taught by that religion. Though paradoxically, that religious establishment doesn't like what I just said. Others of my tribe didn't make the same journey, and they're still defending tribal boundaries and loyalties. And many of you who are listening to this in person or online have had a journey similar to mine. Some of you didn't. In one way or another, religion has betrayed you or hurt you, wounded you, but nonetheless, you are here in something that is an offering of a religious institution. Now, I think, this is not my notes, but I think the reason that I have postponed talking about Jesus is that it's difficult to talk about a religionless Jesus to either one of those demographics. I think it's very difficult, even for progressives, to allow God to come down out of the sky to abide with and live within creation. Nonetheless, I want to teach a bit about Jesus today and how he and his teachings can be a ray of hope, one of those non-negotiables in the sacred stream in my current understanding. And I see this work that we're doing right now as we prepare to prepare ourselves to face what is coming in the next 6 months. And folks, nobody knows what that is. But either way the November election goes, it's going to be messy. And I think that our work here should equip us to deal with the future with wisdom and courage and character and hope. Now, I'm going to condense today's talk to a few sentences, and then you can zone out if you want to. They are, I'm a child of God. This is today's talk. Right? I'm a child of God, and Jesus is my brother. As are all others my brothers and sisters. And if I can borrow from the language of St. Francis, so is brother, sun, and sister moon. All creation. It's hard for every one of us. I don't care how educated you are. I don't care how sophisticated you are. It's hard for everybody in this room not to get it that the sun doesn't rise in the east. The sun doesn't rise. All right? The earth turns. But we don't get that. It's hard to do. And it is difficult to embrace that Jesus didn't come down and die for our sins, because we've heard that over and over and over and over. So, what do you really know about Jesus? What does anybody really know about Jesus? And I'm going to say, frankly, not much. His earlier followers had a way of thinking and speaking about him that is absolutely foreign to us because they were Jewish and we aren't. His followers told parables about Jesus. The birth stories and the final week stories are all parables. But we take them literally and therefore miss their meaning. Those stories are not factual news reports, but what Caputo and other scholars refer to as mytho-poetic writings, which we have taken literally and therefore robbed them of their power. I got involved with a group of scholars known at the time as the Jesus Seminar. They no longer exist. I got involved in 1924, so a little over 20 years ago now. They were a 2004 is when I got involved, so 20 years ago. I'm sorry. All right. I'm a theologian, not a mathematician. The Jesus Seminar was a special branch of the Westar Research Institute, which still exists. The Westar Research Institute gathers scholars, biblical scholars, religious scholars from all over the world, mostly English speaking, but many not, to do ongoing research in the development of religious themes, particularly around the topic of the early church and Christianity. They still publish their work. There was a work recently published by them, The Origins of Christianity or something like that. It's not as good as some of their other works, but still very enlightening. And it lets you know what kind of research is being done in biblical areas. So we have advances in physics and medicine and chemistry and astronomy, and these sometimes make the front page of the newspapers. There are similar advances that go on in the name of religion, religious studies, archaeology, that sort of thing, but they don't usually make it in the papers, and they certainly don't make it to many church education programs. But they're there, they exist. I'd like to think that ordinary life is one of the places where this research gets talked about. I'm not one of those scholars. I want to be clear about that. I read them. I know about their work. I benefit from it, but I'm not one of them. So at any rate, it was the intent of the Jesus Seminar to be as public as possible about their work. And they were, when they started, greeted with applause by scholars all over the world, except in organized Christianity. I remember 20 years ago when I was going to my first Jesus Seminar meeting, saying to somebody here in this church that I would be going to such a meeting, and they said, quote, "Aren't you afraid that that will disturb your faith?" Serious means a serious line. Siri just answered my question. I even have it on Do Not Disturb. I can be at the office here and call home, and the phone picks up, and I leave a voice message, and I say, "Hey, Sherry." And Siri comes on and says, "Yes, how can I help you?" So you can't. I found the work of the Jesus Seminar to be very exciting, very enlivening, very educational for me. And one of the guys that I met at the Jesus Seminar is a guy named Don Cupid. Big guy. He's a big guy. And Don Cupid wrote this book, The Sea of Faith. And there are even Sea of Faith communities around the world, by the way. Please don't go join one. Stay here. Don Cupid took a line from a poem by Matthew Arnold and gave the title to a series of lectures that were broadcast on the BBC, then copied and taken and published as this book. And the line in the Matthew Arnold poem talks about the ebb of the ocean coming into the shore and going out, Sea of Faith. And the Matthew Arnold poem implies that every time the ebb tide comes in, it changes the coast, and it's a different body of water when it comes back again. So the Sea of Faith is this ever-going evolutionary change in religion. That metaphor makes sense? Okay. By the way, this book is on YouTube as a series of videos broadcast by the BBC. And I warn you that the subtitles are wonky because it was made a long time before we had technology to do good subtitles. So this man, one of the Jesus Seminar scholars, and others like him, spent their lives trying to determine what Jesus more than likely said and did, and what he definitely did not say and do. So I want to give you a mixed message about Jesus Seminar findings. If you want to know the summary of what they found about what Jesus said, you can find it in a little book that you can get off Amazon by Robert Funk, F-U-N-K, called The Gospel of Jesus. Highly recommend it. In there you will find what these best scholars say more than likely Jesus said. The other side of what I want to say about that in a mixed message is we don't actually know what Jesus said, because we don't have anything in the language in which he spoke preserved. Maybe 4 or 5 words. So, you've played the game of gossip? You know how you say something and it passes down, passes down, passes down? So you say something in one language and translate it to another and to another and to another, and there you got it. Further, when Jesus himself spoke, he cherry-picked from his Jewish tradition. I'm going to return to this at the end of the talk today. So, cherry-picking is what we all do. So Jesus came on the scene at a time when there were many people in the Jewish population who were speaking out of a prophetic tradition. Many prophets at that time, people who went by that name. And this is one of the reasons that Jesus could have access to the Jewish elite, to going into the synagogue and into the temple, because he presented himself as in that prophetic tradition. He was also clearly a wisdom teacher. And he seemed to have some personal experience with the wisdom that he was teaching. He wasn't just quoting someone and citing books to do like I do. He seemed to know what he was talking about. So he taught out of his inherited tradition and personal experience. And further, though he was in a wisdom tradition and used that form of teaching, he was an absolute master of this teaching. Scholars have teachings of other people at the time of Jesus. None can equal what he did in putting aphorisms together and telling stories. Now, when I say that Jesus was in the prophetic tradition, I don't mean he could predict the future, except to say, if you keep doing what you're doing, this is what's going to happen. Further, Jesus was a movement founder. I don't intend to imply that he founded what we have today. However, if it had not been for the movement that Jesus organized and founded, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have the stories. No one would have collected anything if he hadn't founded and started this movement. But after his death, it got out of hand, which is both good and bad. One of the things that Jesus did that seemed outrageous, and which I believe that we ignore at our peril today, is that he exercised organizational power by organizing the powerless. He organized the poor. Let me say that again. One of the things that we ignore at our peril in society today is the power of the poor. So he took advantage of those who felt like they had so little, who felt like they had so little to lose, who felt like they had been treated so unfairly, who saw no hope for a different kind of future, who were willing to resort to incredible extremes to join up with him. Now, he was not a modest man, this Jesus fellow. He was willing to go up against not only his religion, but against the political powers of the time and tell them what so. I saw just this morning somebody on one of the Substack things that I read who said that a Nobel Prize should be given to the first reporter who goes to a current presidential candidate and says, "What the hell are you thinking?" Nobody does that. He went up against the most powerful political organization ever in history until our own. The Jewish religion, in order to save itself, it thought, had aligned itself with Roman power. Now, recall last week what I said, quoting a certain evangelical leader who said in defense of what they are supporting now in politics, sometimes you need a barbarian to protect you from the barbarians. And that's where the evangelical Christian church has moved in our country. So the Jewish system had a very rigid set of laws that you had to abide, otherwise you were shunned. The Roman system had a very rigid hierarchical system that you had to adhere to, otherwise you were executed. You had to walk that path. So at the time of Jesus, those who were at the bottom of the heap, they longed for change. They ate for things to be different. Some had a go at changing things. They hardly made a ripple. One example was the Maccabees, from which we get the story of Hanukkah. Didn't make a difference. Another one that we're more familiar with is a guy named, we call him John the Baptist. He criticized the immorality of a marriage choice by the current political leader. Do you see any parallels in what we're talking about? And as a party favor, he lost his head. Another thing Jesus had going for him was that there is this idea that had been nurtured among the Jewish people for some time that someday God was going to deliver the Jewish people from their oppression, and that God was going to do this in the way of one person who would come and be their savior, their deliverer. It would be a political, military figure, not somebody who forgave sins. But the glory of Israel would be renewed. And Jesus took advantage of that. He exploited it. One of the most brilliant things that Jesus did was present brand new ideas and label them as orthodox. That's religion in religion. He insisted that he was not calling for a change, which is what exactly he was doing. So in essence, he said to the Jewish leaders, you guys have got it wrong. You've misunderstood what our religion is really all about. And in Matthew's narrative, we have like 14 instances of where Jesus did this. So Jesus would say, hey, look, I haven't come to abolish the law and the prophets. And so the leaders would let their guard down, and he'd sneak in what teaching he had for them, and they would get irritated, but they couldn't do anything about it because he'd already said, I'm just following your rules. That was a brilliant tactic. He first said, let's conform to the law and the prophets. And then he would redefine what the law and the prophets said. Another important thing about Jesus was that he was a healer. Now, I don't know what you do with the healing stories of Jesus. I take them as metaphors, mythopoetic stories. I think the way that Jesus healed people was that he looked past what they thought defined them to who they really were. And in that being so seen, they experience freedom. If you take them as literal, that's fine. Either way you take them, they're in the story. All the narratives that we have, those that made it into the gospel, what we call the New Testament, and those that didn't, they all contain miracle stories. Now, being healed stirs something up in people. And that's something that it stirs up. It's hope. People at all levels of society get sick. Rich people get sick. Powerful people get sick. So in touching those people's lives, Jesus had access to the rich and the powerful. Now, one of the things that happens when somebody gets healed of a life-threatening or social shunning condition is what? They go tell other people. Especially if the guy who does the healing says, now don't tell anybody. Which is exactly what he did. Clever guy. One of the most important things that set Jesus apart from the other teachers of his day is that he not only had disciples, he had apostles. Disciples follow. Apostles are empowered. So he took a few people and he transmitted his power, whatever that was, to them and said, I want you to go and do what I have done. And that way the message spread. At the end of the Gospel of John, which is the most metaphorical gospel that we have, Jesus then said to his disciples, which would include us, I deputize you to go do exactly what I'm doing. As a matter of fact, you will do greater things than I have done. So he asked these apostles as well as his disciples to give up everything related to any ambition they might have in the current culture. And my belief is that because of teachings about Jesus in our culture, those that take place in the church and those that take place in popular media, many people have developed a view or an understanding of Jesus that is just wrong. It doesn't have these elements in it. So people still think, like they think the sun rises in the east, that Jesus came down to save. Jesus was a very real, first century Palestinian Jew who pledged an allegiance to his understanding of God above everything else. Now, the next thing I want to say about Jesus, which will lead us a step further into religion without religion, is that Jesus doesn't belong to anybody. We don't have a monopoly on Jesus. I think one of the reasons that recent Jesus scholarship upset so many people was that it messes with their notion that they think they control Jesus. And the church has a bloody history of holding it that only those who accept their interpretation of Jesus are people of God. Now, I hope that you can see that it's easy for anyone, your teacher would be one of them, to profess some following or allegiance to Buddha without being a Buddhist. That's possible. So to get Jesus and our understanding of Jesus away from the church, that is, away from the creedal statements and interpretations of organized religion, to let him function in the culture like Buddha functions in the culture would be a huge relief for everybody, in my opinion. So the earliest Jesus followers developed a tradition of peace and joy and hope and forgiveness, despite the way their culture affected them. This is an example of the hope that I'm talking about. Hope is a deed, not the wishful thinking that everything's going to be okay. Hope is behaving in a certain way in spite of. So they focused on correcting in ways that they could the social injustices that they received. And when people new to the movement went to Jesus and said, "What can we do to have the kind of life that you have? What can we do to be what you are teaching?" And Jesus told a story. We know it as the story of the Good Samaritan. And they wanted to kill him for that story, they being the people in power, not his followers. So even a superficial reading of the Jesus story reflects that he would not be supporting anti-gay, transgender, ignoring climate justice, denying what science is telling us. Clearly, his teachings do not support wealth concentration, mass militarization, mass armament, mass incarceration, blanket deportation. Jesus focused on loving others, being open, affirming, forgiving, inclusive. As a matter of fact, Jesus did not emphasize anything that the movement we call Christian nationalism emphasizes. Not one. The primary teaching of Jesus was, I'm a child of God. His understanding of God, which was likely as conditioned by his culture as ours is by ours, was, I'm a child of God and so are you. And he acknowledged this relationship that he had with God as something everybody shared or could. So if I'm going to be a person who embraces the teachings of Jesus, it will mean that I too will say I'm a child of God, and because I'm going to be in that tradition, not in some other. And by the way, I want to say again, we are only talking this way because we're here. We would not be talking about this way if we were somewhere else. That makes sense? We would not be having this conversation if we were in Japan. Okay. So, though it's really risky, this labeling business, if I'm in the tradition of the Jesus tradition, I will say, I'm a child of God and Jesus is my brother. And if I listen to the teachings, I will say, so is everyone else, my brother and sister. And if I listen to the people who found the religion in the religion, like St. Francis, I will say, so is brother, son, and sister moon. Okay. You notice there's no room for a creed in that. There's no room for literalization in that. Further, from all the evidence we have, Jesus was not in competition with any other religion of his time. So that infers that there's no path complete, and every path is at risk of being potentially corrupted. It's also very easy, looking at the data that we do have, to make a solid case for the fact that Jesus had a daily spiritual practice. Now, I can affirm all this without being part of a religious group, but I have to acknowledge that it was because of religion that I'm here able to affirm this. It was religion that preserved the documents, religion that preserved the stories. Okay. So when I was in seminary, there was a book, the only book I've recommended really today. It's just a record called The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a German pastor who stood up against the acquiescence of Christians in Germany who supported Hitler. I could devote several class sessions to this guy. I encourage you at least to read the Wikipedia article about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was the one from whom I first heard the phrase religionless Christianity. And he affirmed that what it meant to be Christian was a life of constant decision, redecision, risk-taking, and responsibility held in tension with an ever-growing understanding and re-understanding of the teachings of Jesus. That there was no static body, that we kept having to redo this every step of the way. So the primary focus of the teaching of Jesus was not some afterlife. It was about living now. It's about living with others right here and now. And Bonhoeffer saw the model for this in that Jesus didn't leave his religion, but found within his religion the core of another religious expression that became his ministry. And Bonhoeffer called it religionless Christianity. So as I said, my re-interest in religion without religion has been reignited by my love affair with John Caputo. It's found in the mystics of all traditions. And what it means, I just want to go back to Caputo's words again, is that religion contains what it cannot contain. Another way I thought about saying this week, it harbors what cannot be harbored. You know, the word harbor has two meanings. To keep a secret and to keep safe. Right. Or as I would put it right now, we need ways to think that get us out of the ways we've been thinking. A way of thinking that makes room for the intensive search for wisdom and wonder. And it's just a sad fact. I'm not looking to blame anyone that religion has removed truth from its teaching. Now, any religion can do what I am about to describe has happened to the Christian religion. It's happened in Judaism, it's happened in Islam, it's happened in Buddhism, it's happened in every expression of religion historically. But I'm speaking about Jesus and not the religion of Jesus. And I want to be really clear that you get that preposition. It's the religion about Jesus that I'm speaking about, not the religion of Jesus. Those are two really different things. So here's a parable about the territory that got us to right here, either with gratitude or with fear. Many years ago, to keep from being burned by the sun, people built a large umbrella. They knew the sun was important and that people needed to be exposed to it from time to time for health reasons. But people, and by people I mean those in charge, thought it was their responsibility to keep people from being burned by the sun, so they built this big umbrella. And then started telling people when they could and could not go out into the sun until they finally said you can't go into the sun at all. However, the sun is important, and we've collected a bunch of stories about the sun. Some of them are good, some of them are awful, and we put them together in this book that we call the Bible You can read that and find out about the sun, but don't get in it. Then, since there were people over time who had never seen the sun, they decided that they would get a candle and light the candle to represent the sun. And they call that candle Jesus. And then to keep the candle from blowing out, they put it in a lantern so the wind wouldn't get to it, and they call the lantern the church. I stole that parable idea from a guy named Nels Ferre, another philosopher. So one difference between Buddhism and Christianity is that Buddha and his disciples have taught from the very beginning that the teachings of Buddha were merely fingers pointing to the moon. They weren't the moon itself. And sadly, when the movement that Jesus started got organized, it didn't take that approach. It didn't say that the teachings are the finger pointing to the moon. It said the teachings are the thing that's important. And don't dispute them. Now, someone could listen to what I'm saying today and say that I'm just making the Bible or the tradition say what I want it to say. I am guilty as charged. So is every spiritual teacher in every tradition. We are an untrustworthy sort. That's why you need to check this stuff out for yourself. If you resonate with it and it makes sense to you, stick around. Go check it out. I believe I have a good model for what I'm doing. It is my brother Jesus. One day Jesus went into the temple and he picked up the scroll of Isaiah and he read these words. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And then he put the scroll down. One translation of that passage says that he read that portion and he closed the book. They didn't have books, but that's what one translation said. And the first sermon I preached on that text in 1964 was the value of a closed Bible. I was a heretic even then. If Jesus had not closed the scroll, that passage in Isaiah goes on to say, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God. But he didn't read that. He cherry-picked. He omits the part about God's vengeance and holds up God's favor. And as we get deeper into the teachings of Jesus, you will see he does this sort of thing all the time. He is finding the religion in his religion. Now, he could find anything he wanted to in that religion because the Jewish religion is full of all sorts of things. You can find vengeance, you can find justification for hating and killing other people. Retribution. But he didn't find that. He took sides. He took the side of grace. He took the side of healing. Jesus said, to hell with hell. And my hope is that if when we get in or realize that we are already in the sacred stream, we will experience that same Spirit upon us to proclaim God's grace and to omit vengeance and violence, because it's only then that the world will be saved. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this: you carry precious cargoes, so watch your step and stay safe in the storm, and I'll see you here next week.